You know, when you think about Apple, what comes to mind? Probably the iPhone, right? Or maybe the Mac. But what if I told you that Apple's real product isn't something you can hold at all? It's actually this invisible fortress, this brilliantly designed system that once you're inside, you might never want to leave. All right, let's get into it. So, to really get this, we have to rewind the clock, all the way back to 1997. Apple was, and I'm not exaggerating, a joke, a total cautionary tale. I mean, their biggest rival, Michael Dell, was out there telling everyone they should just pack it in. And this wasn't just some clever trash talk. Pretty much the whole tech world agreed with him. The situation was dire. We're talking 90 days away from going completely broke. The company that gave us the Macintosh was about to just disappear. But what happened next wasn't just some lucky comeback. Oh no, it was the beginning of one of the most powerful and dominant business models in modern history.
When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he didn't just walk in with a bunch of cool new product ideas. He came back with a blueprint, a whole new strategic plan to flip the company's biggest weaknesses into its most untouchable strengths.
And that plan really boiled down to three core ideas. First, build what we now call the walled garden. Second, absolutely master the art of radical simplicity. And third, create something called the halo effect. This right here, this was the playbook that changed everything. So let's start with that first pillar, the foundation of the whole Apple empire, the ecosystem. Now, you've probably heard that word 1,000 times, but its real power comes from a very deliberate and kind of ruthless business strategy. See, most companies, they just do one thing. They make the hardware or they make the software. But Apple does it all. They design the chip, the phone itself, the operating system, and all the services that run on it. That total control is how they create that magical, it just works feeling, which, by the way, is also designed to lock you in. And this, right here, is the psychological genius behind the walled garden. Think about it. Every single photo you save to iCloud, every app you buy, even those little blue iMessage bubbles, they all create what's called friction. It makes leaving feel like a huge pain. It's not that you can't leave, but it feels like you'd be losing a chunk of your digital life. So you stay, not because you're physically locked in, but because the hassle of getting out just seems way too high. And wow, you can see that friction pay off in cold, hard cash. Just look at this breakdown from 2023. Okay, no surprise, the iPhone is still the king, making up over half the revenue. But look at that next slice, services. At 22%, it's bigger than the Mac and the iPad combined. That is the walled garden doing its thing. We're talking subscriptions, App Store fees, iCloud, you name it. But just how big is that slice, really?
$85.2 billion. That is just the services division in 1 year. To give you some perspective, that one piece of Apple's business is bigger than the entire yearly revenue of massive companies like Nike or Netflix. It's insane. They basically built a subscription service to your life.
Okay, so the ecosystem keeps you in the fortress, but what gets you to walk through the gates in the first place? Well, that leads us to pillar number 2, the luxury of simplicity. And the key here wasn't about adding more stuff, it was about taking things away. Remember phones before the iPhone? They were covered in buttons, they had tiny keyboards, maybe a stylus. The thinking was that more features meant more value. Apple came along and understood something really basic about people. We hate being overwhelmed. Choice is a burden. So they got rid of the keyboard, the stylus, all the clutter, and turned this complicated gadget into something simple, beautiful, and intuitive. But this obsession with simplicity isn't just about good looks. It is a deadly effective business weapon. While their competitors were making dozens of different phone models, Apple was focused on just a few. And that gives them unbelievable power. When you're ordering tens of millions of the same screen or the same chip, you get to dictate the terms. You control the whole supply chain. And that means you lack in huge profit margins. And you can see this philosophy just play out again and again over the years. From the iMac that literally saved the company, to the iPod, to the iPhone, and the iPad, the playbook was always the same. Simplify, polish, and perfect. And that brings us to the third, and maybe the most clever, strategy of all, using one fantastic product experience to sell you on the next one. Let's go back to 2001. Almost everyone was using a Windows PC. So what did Apple do? They released the iPod. It was a pretty small, not too expensive device that did one thing perfectly. And here's the kicker, it worked with Windows. It was the perfect Trojan horse. It got millions of people to experience Apple's design and user-friendliness for the very first time. And today, the halo effect is more powerful than ever.
It doesn't start with a $1,000 computer anymore. Nope. It starts with a pair of AirPods or an Apple Watch. You buy one thing, you fall in love with how seamless it is, and all of a sudden that new iPhone or Mac starts looking really appealing. One great experience creates a halo of trust over the whole brand. So those three pillars built the original fortress, but in the last few years, Apple added a massive new reinforcement to its walls. They took a growing public fear, our privacy, and turned it into a killer competitive advantage. With just a single software update, Apple suddenly gave every user a very simple choice. Do you want to let this app track you or not? Now, on the surface, this was a fantastic win for us, the consumers. But beneath the surface, it was an absolute masterstroke of strategy. So what happened? Well, the results were just staggering. A whopping 96% of users in the US said, nope, don't track me. With one move, Apple crippled the advertising models of competitors like Meta. At the exact same time, they painted themselves as the good guys, the trustworthy guardians of your data. It just made that walled garden feel safer, more premium, and more exclusive than ever before.
So when you put it all together, the walled garden, that radical simplicity, the halo effect, and now privacy, you can really see the architecture of Apple's dominance. But none of it would have been possible without one key decision, right at the very beginning, when things looked their worst.
Remember 1997, when Steve Jobs got on stage and announced a partnership with his #1 enemy, Microsoft. A lot of people thought it was a surrender, that Apple was admitting defeat. But Jobs knew he didn't have to beat Microsoft at their own game. He just needed to stay alive long enough to completely change the game for everyone.
And that's because Apple's secret has never really been about being first. I mean, this table says it all, right? They didn't invent the MP3 player, they didn't invent the smartphone, and they sure didn't invent the tablet computer. They let other companies try and fail, they watched to see what frustrated people, and then they swooped in with the version that finally just worked.
Which really brings us to the core question about what Apple actually does. Are they true inventors, or are they just the world's greatest perfecters?
And maybe that's the ultimate lesson here. Apple's incredible journey from the brink of death to a global fortress shows us that winning isn't always about creating something brand new. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is find the friction in our lives, the complexity, the frustration, the clunky interfaces, and just relentlessly get rid of it.